Weird animals in Utah. I was involved in a discussion over at Reddit Missing 411 about Skinwalker Ranch. I live in a general area and I've had experience or two, and it was suggested that I post it here, so here I am. This particular story happened in August of 2004, probably around 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I've been camping with a group and my boyfriend's mom needed to run back to town for something. I volunteered to go with her because I have no idea why looking back. We left the campsite and drove maybe 50 yards to where the road crossed a slightly wider but still crummy dirt road. Right across the intersection were two animals that I at first thought were deer because of their size, but the color was wrong, and one of them just kind of sitting back on its haunches. When we pulled up and stopped, it stood up and they both just kind of stood there, kind of shifting their weight from foot to foot and taking a step in one direction and then another. I felt a little scared because I couldn't reconcile these creatures with any animal I'd ever seen before. I asked my boyfriend's mom, "What the hell are those?" And she said, "Oh, those are hares. Like it's no big deal." Friends, those were not hares. The only thing they had in common with hares were very large ears. They were the size of deer. They had very long legs and moved kind of stiffly, and they didn't hop with their back legs like rabbits, hares, and jackrabbits do. The legs all moved independently, and they took actual steps, not hops. The closest thing I can compare them to are the land striders from the Dark Crystal, if any of you are old enough to know what I'm talking about. The color was more brown, and the legs weren't that long, but that was my initial impression. They were just milled around in that road while I watched. And then my boyfriend's mom turned onto the other road and we drove away. She acted like it was nothing, which made me feel pretty scared because I knew those weren't hares or jackrabbits or any kind of creatures that should have been up there. I've seen jackrabbits, I've hunted them, I know what they look like. Same with deer. I don't know what these were, but I still get creeped out thinking about them. Every year or so since then, I have Googled images of hares and jackrabbits, trying to find an image that matches what I saw that day. But nothing comes close. I don't know what they were. As I mentioned above, this came up in a discussion of Skinwalker Ranch. I don't know if my experience was directly related to the ranch or not, but I've lived here for a good long while. I know that the whole basin has weird stuff going on, and has for a long time now. So, there's one of my stories. Any replies are welcome. Something in the woods is back. I live in West Virginia, and although I live just outside of one of the larger cities in the state, it's still a pretty rural area. And because of this, I've grown up very familiar with the woods and wildlife, and although I'm not exactly an avid outdoorsman, I do have some knowledge, and I'm not uncomfortable or overly afraid of the woods, or most of the creatures living there. I had originally posted around a year ago about an encounter I had in the woods, bordering my backyard. The general consensus, and one I eventually came up to myself, was that it was an animal, and I was overreacting and scaring myself. I was fairly convinced that it was probably the case, and eventually deleted the thread. Now, after further experiences, I'm not so sure anymore. To sum up the original post, I live in a neighborhood with 3 other houses on 3 sides of me, but in the backyard, approximately 50 yards downhill from the house, there are woods and no other houses in that direction for over a mile. At the time, my wife and I were separated, so I was staying at the house, alone. One evening, I let the dogs out and noticed a pair of eyes right at the edge of the woods watching me. At first, I wasn't too concerned, as I assumed it was just a deer, which frequent the backyard because of our apple trees. However, after watching the eyes for a bit, they did not move at all, and appeared to be about 8 feet off the ground, and were the wrong color for a deer's eyes. I took the dogs inside and got a flashlight and returned. The eyes still had not moved or looked away. They were staring directly at me when I returned, which would be unusual for a deer. Now, whatever it was was positioned out of range of my light, so I could not get a look at it, at what it might be, and I did not feel like going down the hill to get a closer look, because I no longer felt that it was just a harmless deer. At the time, I believed it could have been a predator. So, I just went back inside and locked the door and turned off the lights in the kitchen so whatever it was would go away. Where the story really began to freak me out was when I came back to the kitchen later on and discovered that the eyes still had not moved and were still staring at me and my mostly dark house. This isn't normal behavior for most animals, even for a predator. If there was nothing to actively hold its attention for a long period of time, it should have moved on. Long story short, whatever it was stayed in that position staring at my house all night long. I was unnerved enough that I couldn't sleep and kept a gun near me for the rest of the night. I would periodically check, and the eyes were there every time I looked, until the sun came up. The next day, I found no trace of anything in that area. No animal tracks of any kind. This was definitely not at all normal behavior for any animal I'm aware of. And the fact that it left no tracks at all freaked me out even more. Now, that's where the encounter ended. I haven't seen anything again, and after posting and reading comments, I pretty much decided it was just an animal and I freaked myself out. So I deleted the thread and thought nothing more about it. Fast forward until this month. We had a couple of heavy snowstorms this winter that had knocked down some trees at the edge of the woods. Recently, it's been unseasonably warm though, and I decided it would be a great time to clean up the backyard and get rid of those trees. There was a small shed just inside the woods that had been there since before we moved in, but I've never really paid it any attention to it. It was dilapidated, and the door was off the hinges. I don't spend much time around the woods in the backyard, and it can just barely be seen from the house, so I had no reason to mess with it. Well, during the cleanup, I got a little curious about the shed, and decided to take a look for the first time. To my horror, the walls, floors, and ceilings of the shed were completely covered with weathered old satanic symbols, and there were stains on the floor that were probably blood. I knocked the fuck out of there, and ended up tearing the thing down and burning it along with the trees I was cleaning up. I haven't been back down to the woods since. Whatever was in the woods previously has returned though. That very night I burned the shed, I saw those eyes again, and I've seen them frequently since. On more than one occasion, I've seen even several sets of eyes. So far nothing has happened in the house, and whatever it is, kept its distance. But I'm very concerned now. I'm afraid to go near the woods or even out in my own backyard. Does anyone have any ideas on what this could be? Or what I could do to get rid of it? Cat creature? So, I've had a few paranormal encounters, and I have plenty of stories from my family as well. I was going to start posting one every Sunday on my Tumblr, so I asked my sibling which experience they thought was the spookiest to start with. They chose the cat lady. And to be honest, I just kind of pushed her in the back of my mind because I was so scared. I've only told that story a handful of times, but I agreed and wrote the story out to share. But now I'm back to thinking about her again, and I'm a little on edge, and really wondering if anyone else has seen this thing, or if it was just me. So, When I was 13 years old, I was living with my mother and her boyfriend at the time in his trailer. I mean, overall it wasn't bad. The only part I hated was that there was honestly no store nearby and the bed. The bed was an old hospital-type bed. The guy's mother had been through hospice and it was uncomfortable, and to be honest, always felt kind of creepy. The house itself wasn't bad. I was comfortable being on my own. Anyways, my room was at the back of the trailer. A long open floor plan led to the front of the home, where the kitchen and the living room sat, separated by a small partition. From my bed, I could see all the way into the kitchen and part of the living room. I had settled into bed one night, but I was restless and unable to sleep for a long time. After much tossing and turning, I had started to get comfortable and thought sleep might finally happen, but my back was to the open door, which I have always hated, so I rolled over one more time to face the door. Then I saw it. I saw a figure standing at the far end of the kitchen. She had to be about 6 feet. She was lean and completely nude. Her skin was a creamy beige dappled with a very light lavender here and there. It reminded me of the freshly dead. Waxy, smooth, purple and blue undertones blossoming about the body. At that moment, I thought it was strange I could see so much detail, considering the fact that the only light was coming from the street light outside. But the truly odd part, however, was her head. She had a cat's head, but it was almost papier-mâché mask-like. The eyes were closed slits, reminding me very much of a stylized Maneki Nico, but there was no smile on her face, no mouth that I could see. In fact, aside from the eyes, there wasn't much detail anywhere on her body, to be honest. At that moment, I closed my eyes for a count of 10 seconds, convinced I had just been letting my imagination run wild. When I opened my eyes again, she wasn't gone. She was closer. She was now standing at the edge of the kitchen and the beginning of the hall. My heart leapt into my throat as I stared at her. She didn't really move much. Sometimes I thought I would catch her head tilt to the side, or she would sway slightly. Now, I closed my eyes again. At that moment, I tried to think. It couldn't be my mother or her boyfriend. They were in their bedroom and didn't want to be bothered. I know what that means. I was smart enough to know what that meant. So, I was sure they were busy, and this wasn't either of them with the cat head. All the doors and windows were locked as well. We were the only ones in the house. This had to be my imagination, nothing but that. This couldn't be a real person. Again, I slowly opened my eyes. She was gone. I relaxed. See? Just my imagination. Mother always said I was creative. I noticed movement in the bathroom. Slowly, she leaned around the corner of the bathroom, looking down the hall at me. I let out a small whimper. I tried to scream for my mother, but nothing could come out. I kept trying to call for her, but I was frozen with fear. All I could do was scoot back further in the bed, shake and whine under my breath. At that moment, I slowly realized she could only move when my eyes were closed. But I couldn't stand looking at her. It made my heart pound out of my chest, and I wanted to puke. It made me ill to look at her, like vertigo. I closed my eyes one more time, convinced if I just kept them closed until morning, I wouldn't have to deal with her. I was determined to just go to sleep, just lay there and pray. I would live through the night. Things would be better tomorrow. But I heard a loud shuffle and the sound of a body hitting the wood paneling. In my panic, I made the tragic mistake of opening my eyes. She was now standing right outside my bedroom door. I flung myself face first into my pillow. I squeezed tight. I finally found my voice and screamed bloody murder. One soundless scream followed by endless chants of "Mom! Mom! Mom!" My mother came flying out of her room and into mine. Suddenly all the lights were on. Mom held me and told me it was a dream. I was in hysterics. I managed to talk to my mom into letting me stay in her room that night. Eventually, I slept on the floor next to her side of the bed. They kept the bathroom light on for me. They also locked the bedroom door on my insistence. After a few sleepless nights in my mom's room, then on the sofa with all the lights on, they moved my bed away from the door and got me a lamp for my room, so I could just shut and lock the door. I can also have light, and most importantly though, I can sleep away from the door. It was surprising how quickly I got over the situation at the time, thinking about how creepy and weird the whole thing was. But now, so many years later, when I recount this story, and looking back on it now, it really still scares the shit out of me. And the question I still have inside me that can never be answered, I will ask you now, and hope that one of you guys will be able to answer it for me. The question is, what was it?